Hey everyone, it's been a while. This is the Amateur Logician. Memory is indispensable in acquiring knowledge. In this video, we'll talk about Aristotle's guide to help us remember things. There's the law of similarity, the law of contrast, and the law of proximity. We'll also explore philosophical questions about memory with the help of a great philosopher, namely Michael Huemer, and I'm going to reference his really interesting and good book, Understanding Knowledge. How can we justify our memory of what we think we know? We'll look at Bertrand Russell's famous or semi-famous 5-minute hypothesis and more. Now, memory is definitely a necessary condition, but is not a sufficient condition for education. Traditional education knew this, at least implicitly, so to speak. Yet modern education often disregards this. Really, much of modern education is an insanely expensive fraud. And that's why we need to build parallel institutions. My website plays a small part in this, by the way, at amateurlogician.com. Now, when we know something, we have a tight possession of some object or theory in our mind. Part of my mission as the amateur logician is to help myself and others enlarge our logical thinking and our ability to acquire new knowledge. But we cannot do that without strengthening our abilities to remember. Now, some people have great memory but little intelligence. They can memorize everything, but they can't really utilize that, so to speak, beyond just repetition of various facts. And there are some people with great intelligence, but with poor memory. Yet usually those with great intelligence just have their memory hyper-specialized, so to speak, in their areas of interest. All human beings are equal in the sense that we all partake in the nature of being a human being. That doesn't mean we are equal in other senses. Some have better memory than others, of course. In any case, memory is essential. Without memory, we could not recognize things we now perceive that we've experienced in the past. We could not have any coherent sense of self. Without memory, the bond between the past and the present will be totally broken. We take this for granted. So with that, Aristotle provided helpful hints on how we can memorize things, how we can remember things, how we can recall things. The ability to recall is something to develop, and we could develop it by associations. So Aristotle talked about the law of similarity. If x is like y and z, then just think of y and z, and then x will more likely come to you. Consider similar things, and then you can recall what you want. For example, you're thinking about a state in the Midwest, but the name escapes you right now. Well, think of other Midwestern states, and then you might stumble into the missing one. We have the law of contrast. If x is in direct contrast to y, then think of y, and then x will more likely come to you. Consider opposites. Maybe you want to memorize names. There's one person who is very introverted and another very extroverted. By associating the two this way, the names stay fresh in the memory. We have the law of proximity. If x is close to y and z, then remember y and z to get x. It's not similarity per se, but closeness. For example, how can you recall historical figures? Well, you can group them together in their respective time period. I've done this when thinking about movies. I linked old movies with specific time periods, with historical events. It works. I'm not a fan of memorizing dates, but it's a way I start to remember dates a little bit better than I did in the past. In a nutshell, when we're thinking about memory, we should distinguish the original impression, the act of retention, and the act of restoration. The initial perception or thought is, of course, the original impression. I see a certain building for the first time. The act of retention is when the memory is stored. The act of restoration is when the memory is brought to consciousness. I can now think about that building I once saw in the past. Simple recognition is when a memory spontaneously appears before me or before you. Simple recall is when there's a deliberate act to bring something before us. And Aristotle's method of using the law of similarity, the law of contrast, and the law of proximity can help us with simple recall, but it also can help us when it comes to the active retention when we put a deliberate effort to memorize something. Okay, let's presently address some philosophical or epistemological issues. Can we believe in what we remember? Most of the things we know are from things we learned in the past, for sure. So if we have no justification for memory, we can have no justification for most of the things we think we know based on memory. Now, Michael Huemer is a very good and interesting philosopher. He has a nice and concise chapter on memory in his book, Understanding Knowledge. And he presents 4 possible theories when it comes to memory justification. We have the inferential theory, the preservation theory, the foundational theory, and the dualistic theory. So one theory is the inferential theory. For instance, maybe I can construct an inductive argument to the effect that in the past, my memory has worked in numerous occasions, so my memory seems reliable. The clear problem here is that this assumes my memory is reliable. Surely the only way I can claim my memory served me well in the past is by using my memory, but the very issue under question is if my memory is reliable in the first place. Hence we have the begging the question fallacy, petitio principii, assuming that which is under dispute. Or maybe I can construct a complex argument that memory is reliable, but following the argument step by step will require memory to be able to even follow it. As Dr. Huemer points out, the skeptic of memory cannot claim victory here, because the moment the skeptic complains about the complex argument, he would have had to use his memory to follow the steps, and hence his argument is self-undermining. A second theory is the foundational theory. Justification here is non-inferential. Let's say I know the Pythagorean theorem, but I have forgotten my original justification of this theory. That's okay. It's a foundation I rest my case on. Now, if someone gives me evidence that my original justification was false, I can then revive my thoughts on this issue. Dr. Huemer gives counter-arguments to this. First, he asks us to pretend you read an argument that makes you believe in dualism in the mind-body problem. Next, you remember that dualism is true. This seems to suggest that you have 2 arguments for dualism, the inferential argument and second, the foundational one. What's wrong is to think that the justification for the belief has thereby increased. Second, Huemer asks us to pretend you believe in immortality based in an unjustified way. Time passes. You've forgotten how you got to this belief. It becomes foundational in memory, and hence you now have a foundational justification. What's wrong here is that an irrational belief can't simply become rational this way. Now we can move on to the preservation theory. With this, memory is not a source of justification. Hence, already this seems to be an improvement from the previous 2 theories. Memory instead only preserves the justification that was initially acquired. That's all. What was justified stays justified. And this addresses the challenges the other theories had, but it doesn't get past Bertrand Russell's 5-minute hypothesis. Pretend the world sprang into being 5 minutes ago. We are exactly the same otherwise. The past didn't exist, but we've implanted memories of a fictitious past. What's wrong with the preservation theory, therefore, is that we have no original justification that's being preserved. Finally, we have the dualistic theory. It's dualistic because there are 2 parts of the justification. There's the justification for acquiring a belief in the first place, and there's the justification for retaining that belief. Because we're only thinking about memory justification, we only really have to consider the second part, the justification for retaining a belief. So in terms of that, it's simply that you're justified in your memory about beliefs as you remember them and have no conflicting evidence that you should think otherwise. The dualistic theory seems to answer all of the previous challenges. For example, the unjustified belief about immortality because there's no justification. It's simply not justified. With the 5-minute hypothesis, notion of the past is by implanted memory, and that itself is sufficient, etc., etc. These types of theories are explained and examined argumentatively in Michael Huemer's book, Understanding Knowledge. Now, I am the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. This has been an overview of memory, the philosophical justification of memory, and we thought about the connection between learning and memory using Aristotle's understanding of association as being key to remembering things and recalling things. I hope all of you are doing well. It's been over a month since I worked on the video. I'm not going to produce as many videos, I don't think, as I did before. However, I do want to still create that logic course, and there will be videos still on symbolic logic, on some economics, on other philosophical issues. I'm going to complete my series on René Descartes. So stay tuned.